The Queen of Swords is a mature and intelligent mother character, of whom we can really imagine doling out advice to her daughter, the Princess of Swords. The Rider-Waite version of this card shows a more traditional looking queen, although interestingly enough her sword is pointed upwards, which is the opposite to what we see here on the Thoth cards. However, she does have upon her throne here a symbol of a cherub, of which is a recurring symbol that we will come back to shortly. First and foremost, she is a mother character, and you can imagine her advice to the princess strengthening her will and resolve. This is because this queen, as the queens are the watery aspect, and so she's the airy part of water. That's quite interesting because they can strengthen each other. If air blew across the sea, it would create stronger waves, and if water became mixed with the air coming down to our world, we might get rain, for example, or hail, or something like that. And so they're neutral to each other, and yet they can actually strengthen each other when the conditions are correct. That idea of her as a mother, of course, is going to be central to this entire card, and so clearly on the Tree of Life, as a queen, she's centred in Binah, and this is the Great Mother, the womb of creation, which receives that masculine force of Shokmar and turns it into form and creates it into form. However, Binah is importantly here ruled by Saturn, and of course Saturn talks about time and death and the impermanence of the physical world of which is given birth to, and so we do see that on this card, that she gives birth to form and creation, and yet she's not above destroying it and taking it away as well if it no longer serves a purpose. She is, however, a very strong card. You can see that her upper body is depicted as naked and the lower body is clothed. This shows her vulnerability, and also that she's not afraid to show that vulnerability. So she's not wearing any type of armour or a regal dress or anything. She's actually just showing her physical self, her physical frame, for what it is. She knows who she is, and she can also see that in everybody else around her, so she's not hiding anything. She's just saying, this is who I am, and showing myself in this way makes me vulnerable, but I accept that, and I'm not afraid to show the reality of myself to the world. The lower half of her, of course, is clothed. She's wearing this quite graceful looking sarong or skirt, and this is quite a flowing garment, as they are in reality, and so this shows that she basically can go with the flow of the world around her. Crowley describes this in the Book of Thoth as her having graceful movements, and her ability in dancing and balancing would be exceptional, and so it's quite a wonderful image that we can depict her perhaps dancing, and this skirt waving around to the movements of her body and the movements of the music, showing that she goes with the flow of the world and the rhythm of all of life of which goes on around her. She doesn't get stuck on one particular note, but goes through with the entirety of things and just lets them flow, which is what, of course, we should all be aiming for in some regards, and what the Swords cards have been perhaps building up to. There's all this conflict which can hold one back, and here we see finally one of whom is able to go with the flow. She is, however, a very analytical and physical world focused queen, and so we see here in a vast difference to the Rider-Waite card. Her sword is pointed downwards towards Malkuth, or towards the physical world that we are born into and live our physical lives within. And this represents her analytical mind, and it shows that she, as she goes with that flow, lives in the moment. She lives in all of the physical world and the changing seasons and the changing cultures and fashions that come and go, and she sees all these things coming into this world around her, and she sees them with logic and with an intelligence. She sees them for what they truly are. And for that reason, this sword represents her as a queen of great clarity. She's not clouded by too much sentimentality or a particular creed or school of which makes her see things in a certain way. She's completely impartial here, and so she sees things unclouded by a social or political or cultural lens. She just sees them for what they are, and so she can be very intellectual in that regard. And this is why she holds in her left hand, of which is that hand of course connected with the left hemisphere and that intellectual and analytical way of thought, a severed head, of which it can also be seen as a mask as well, if we don't want to look at it particularly gruesomely. And this head looks like that of an old man, and therefore could represent old ways of being, old ways of thought. And it's interesting here to have a look yet again at the lust card on the major arcana, of where the beast actually tramples upon what's said to be the old saints underneath. And so what that is, of course, is destroying the old order and the old way of thought in order to, in Thelemic terms, create the new aeon, essentially the coming of a new age, a new way of thinking. And so she does that here with this severed head in her own little way, and the head is old ideas, old ways of thinking of which we have moved on past. It could be habits, even addictions. It could be something as simple as something that we've owned that had a purpose to us for a time, and now we don't need it anymore. And this is quite interesting, because the princess holds her altar, of which is her identity, very close, and she defends it almost with her life. And the queen here has actually been through that when she was younger, that insistence that her identity is not a phase, and then when she looks back on it later, perhaps it's even relatively cringeworthy, because it meant something to her when she was engaged in it, and now she's looking at it with new clarity. She understands what it was. It's not actually silly or stupid. It meant something to her in the time that she had it, but now she doesn't need it anymore, and so she sees things as they are, and she says that is holding us back, that has no more need to be in our life, and so she cuts it off. And that obviously is symbolised here by it being an actual head, perhaps of an old saint. Some have suggested it may be the Hermit card, but I'm not too sure about that. But essentially it is the old thoughts of which would hold us back. And when we start to see something with clarity, we actually naturally start to move out of like these little corners that we've placed ourselves in. And once again, it's all part of going with that flow of life and all of its many experiences that come and go. There is, however, perhaps something a little bit more metaphysical about this severed head. It could be that in this act of severing the head, the consciousness finds itself free from the body, just as the head finds itself severed from the rest of its body that would have walked upon the physical earth. And I know this sounds really quite gruesome at this regard, but it represents a freeing of the mind from the lower self. And so it's a metaphorical symbol of the pure mind, uncontaminated by those things of the world. And one of the things that people actually experience with things like the near-death experience is when they find themselves free from that body, they actually see things with a great clarity, and they see things they describe as more real than real and that type of thing, because all of a sudden their conscious expression of everything is free from, those creeds and schools and religions and cultures and families of which made them think in certain ways. And she is carrying this head and this awareness or consciousness up towards her throne with her, and her throne is made out of clouds, of which represent, of course, air. And clouds can form into shapes by the passage of air, and we can see things in them for a temporary time, and then they fade away. And so it shows that that world of form really comes and goes and returns us yet again to that going with the flow of the changing forms and patterns of the earth. It also represents that her way of speaking to us and getting through to us is through pure intellectual thought, because the air is the power of the mind and the power, if you like, of speech and the way of which we actually communicate with each other through our physical bodies. She doesn't go for the emotion, and she doesn't go for, like the fire and flame and all that like we saw with the wands. Instead, as she speaks to us intellectually. And by doing that, she brings a clarity of understanding to the things around us. And so that's why the sky in the card is very clear. It's showing the clearness of thought, and that her crown is made again out of these crystalline structures which represent the physical world, and yet here they are very clear and clean. And so it shows again that she's showing us the physical things around us, uncontaminated by the things of which make them take on personas of where they may appear to be something they are not. And so this queen will show us that there are no monsters under the bed, and will direct us to look at things with a different perspective, such as if we approached the famous curtain from a different angle, we would see that all of the effects caused by the wizard are actually nothing of the sort. And so this is why we see the character of the cherub on top of her crown, and actually central in the middle of her actual character design. And so the cherub here represents that purity of thought. And of course it's a baby, it's a young child, and so it can mean looking at things, with the perspective of fresh, new and innocent eyes type of thing. It can also be more mystically representing protection or the sacredness of life, the inner spiritual life, which is separate here from the outward consciousness, the lower realms. And so, as we know, the crystalline structure in the Thoth cards, such as her crown here, represents the physical things, the building blocks of all the things around us. The cherub is part of this, and so it shows that really all of those things around us come from that same source. They come from that purity, and the cherub could almost be in the position of Kether right at the top if we superimposed a tree of life over the actual card. And so it's showing when we do see things with purity and with clarity, even though she is a very intellectual and physically focused card, we inevitably come to the conclusion that they all come from that same source, and that love and innocence and beauty really is the core of the whole thing. And so to get the card means that we're going to see that in some way, but we have to cut through our old habits. We have to sever the things of which are holding us down. We then have to look at them with fresh eyes, just like we are that young child, and see them for what they truly are. See them without the fears of which have been superimposed over them by the world, or the media telling us that we have to fear whatever they are trying to push for the moment, because it will only change again later. And so she's saying, cut through it. Don't be emotionally bogged down by these things. Use logic, use fact, cut through them, see what they really are. She's in many ways a really good counsellor, this mother character. She'd be a really good mother to the princess, because she understands everything the princess has gone through, and so she really is full of wisdom and of intelligence. She has worn many different masks throughout her time, and so she understands that we only wear them for a time, and then when we take them off we are liberated, we have learned lessons from them, and we move on, seeing things with the eyes of the young child reborn into a new world of our creation.